0345 951 951. Ring Talkback with your views on new laws to make absent fathers provide for their children.
And in North West Tonight, fears that some women will be put at risk by the system.
Book your call now.
This is BBC One.
The 6 o'clock news from the BBC with John Humphreys and Moira Stewart.
Good evening. The headlines at 6 o'clock. The Jockey Club is to hold a full inquiry into Saturday's Grand National. The punters have been getting their money back. The bookies say we won't sue. United Nations trucks on standby to evacuate 15,000 people from Srebrenica. Nessun Kdenlive, the IRA suspect, will be tried in Dublin. And new guidelines for health workers infected with the AIDS virus. The Jockey Club, the governing body of horse racing, has agreed to hold a full-scale inquiry into the chaotic events at Aintree on Saturday. Its members met in London today under growing pressure to do something quickly to make sure that what happened at the Grand National never happens again. They said they would bring in some new measures immediately, which would improve starting procedures and set up a working party to look at what ought to happen in future. All day, betting shops have been dealing with people who placed their bets on Saturday and now want their money back.
Racing's least welcome event, the Grand National Return Stakes, got underway today as the bookmakers began the painful process of handing back the £75 million they'd taken in bets on Britain's greatest sporting fiasco. Meanwhile, the men who run a sport, which is in effect a multi-million-pound industry, arrived from the Shires to review Saturday's shambles at the London headquarters of the Jockey Club. The urgent priority was to examine what had gone so disastrously wrong and, more importantly, changing archaic procedures to ensure that such a debacle could never happen again. The result, a working party to consider different starting and stopping methods and, immediately, changes to procedure as yet unrevealed to take effect at racecourses around the country from tomorrow. And, rightly, apologies were also in order.
The stewards wish to express their profound regret generally to all supporters of racing, and particularly to the racegoers at Aintree and the connections and riders of the horses taking part, that this great national event was the cause of so much disappointment and frustration.
That the whole inquiry remains in the hands of the stewards whose own antiquated methods had failed so disastrously at Aintree will puzzle some, particularly since the jockeys had long foreseen something similar happening.
The authorities have to have a look at themselves and the fact that there's been several warnings of instances. We've had void races. I've witnessed one and ridden in another this season. There was a case of at Cheltenham of a poor man with a flag stood there with a field galloping around him.
Meanwhile, in certain perhaps predictable quarters, there's still a clamour to restage the race, even though the horses' trainers are firmly against such an idea.
We would say that this is more than just a horse race. I mean, it is the Grand National. It's the greatest sporting occasion in the British calendar. And I think that everything should be tried. We're willing to speak to anyone who is interested in trying to restage it, wherever and whenever that might be.
But for virtually all those devoted to the sport, trying to rerun the National somewhere else at another time of year will be like holding the FA Cup final on a plastic pitch in the middle of summer.
United Nations officials in Bosnia are preparing a mass evacuation of refugees from the besieged Muslim town of Srebrenica. Previous attempts to help refugees desperate to get out of Srebrenica have led to scenes of chaos, with some people being killed in the crush. Now, 60 trucks are standing by, and the UN hopes to carry up to 15,000 people to safety.
In trying to do what it thinks is best for the people of Srebrenica, the UN has spent more time planning, waiting around, being turned back and thwarted constantly by both sides, than actually moving refugees out. It believes that the population of the besieged town should be reduced, particularly those who are already refugees, the thousands who have no real accommodation or support in the town. And on this basis, the High Commissioner for Refugees Special Envoy denies being involved with the policy of ethnic cleansing.
The people we are evacuating from Srebrenica have already been ethnically cleansed because they are coming from areas that have already fallen under Serbian control. They are not people from Srebrenica, they are refugees that arrive
from the villages around.
Villages around, and also from Kanjevice, Polje, from Srpska, areas that fall under Serbian control a couple of weeks ago.
However, Mr. Mendelucci's plan today is ambitious. For over a week, large convoys similar to the 20-truck ones he's now proposing have at times been delayed or refused passage by a single individual military official at a routine checkpoint. The situation is being both intensified and muddled by more fighting. Though the ceasefire is holding up relatively well in most of Bosnia, there is heavy fighting round Srebrenica, with the Serbs shelling south of the town and the Muslims fighting back hard. Also, there is no firm commitment on the ground to the UN's evacuation plans. They are ambitious, and there is considerable doubt here that all will go smoothly. Kate Adey, BBC News, Bosnia.
A British soldier serving in Bosnia has been wounded. An army spokesman said he was hurt while helping refugees to cross the front line between Muslim and Serbian forces near the town of Turbe. A bullet hit his helmet and he had injuries to his skull.
The Western European Union Defence Alliance has agreed to send patrol boats and armed police to the River Danube to reinforce sanctions against Serbia. European foreign ministers have discussed the need for tougher action to isolate Serbia. They were urged by Lord Owen to act decisively.
I don't think this is a time for pussyfooting around. I think we've got to make it absolutely clear to the Bosnian Serbs that we mean business, that the principles of the London conference were not just words on paper, that we're not prepared to accept their present situation and their territorial gains by use of force.
Within the next hour, the IRA terrorist suspect Nessun Quinlivan is to appear at a special court in Dublin. It's believed he'll face firearms charges connected with offences allegedly committed in the Irish Republic ahead of any application to extradite him to Britain. His family say he'll resist any attempted extradition because he says he wouldn't get a fair trial in the United Kingdom. Nessun Quinlivan and Piers Macaulay were arrested at Stonehenge in October 1990. They were wanted for conspiracy to murder the former chairman of Whitbread, Sir Charles Tidbury. They were held at Brixton Prison in South London, but shot their way out in July 91. A gun had been smuggled into the prison in the heel of a training shoe. Yesterday morning in Tipperary, police from the Garda's Specialist Anti-Terror Task Force arrested Quinlivan at a farmhouse 3 miles from Nina. He was alleged to be carrying a loaded revolver. He'll appear within the hour at Dublin's Special Criminal Court. From there, our Ireland correspondent Dennis Murray reports.
Nessun Quinlivan was taken late this afternoon from the police station where he'd been held for a day and a half to be driven to Dublin, where he'll face an arms charge. A crowd of supporters had gathered outside Nina police station in County Tipperary, and they jeered and shouted as he was taken outside and driven away with a heavily armed escort. It'll take several hours for the journey to the Republic's Anti-Terrorist Special Criminal Court, which sits during trials without a jury, where he'll be charged with possession of a weapon in about an hour's time. He'd been arrested yesterday morning and held since then under police and army guard. But around lunchtime today came the decision from the Irish Director of Public Prosecutions that he's to be charged and tried in Ireland, with extradition proceedings delayed till after that.
The likelihood is that extradition proceedings will be deferred until the charges to which I've referred have been disposed of.
Nessun Quinlivan was visited earlier in the day at Nina by his sisters, Emer O'Connor and Cléna Quinlivan, who said that he'll fight extradition if and when proceedings are started.
During his last arrest in Britain and his subsequent escape from Brixton, there was an awful lot of media hype, and there was a lot of things said and printed about him. You know, that a lot of it was basically untrue. You know, the journalists just printed what they thought was the story as opposed to what the story was.
I don't think if he does go to Britain, he won't get a fair trial.
Oh, I don't think so.
None of our family do think that, and we're in full agreement that if he goes to Britain, he will not get a fair trial.
In any event, the Irish authorities have effectively decided that extradition to Britain simply will not be an issue until after his trial at the earliest. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Nina, County Tipperary.
Our Ireland correspondent Dennis Murray joins me from our Dublin studio now. Dennis, is the British government likely to be upset at all that the extradition proceedings won't happen immediately?
Well, whatever backbenchers might say, I would say the government won't be upset, because the United Kingdom government can hardly object if the government of a fellow EC state decides to go with the due process of law in its own jurisdiction. I would also have thought privately that the British authorities would be feeling that, well, if he's in custody and awaiting trial, they'd be quite happy with that. So I don't think they will be annoyed at all.
But he is likely to be extradited eventually?
Well, it's distinctly possible. There is precedent for this, where people who escaped from custody in Northern Ireland were tried down here under the Criminal Law Jurisdiction Act. That means you can be tried in Ireland for offences allegedly committed elsewhere, and they served prison sentences here. And then once they were released from that, the extradition proceedings were started. So yes, he could be extradited at the end of his sentence, should he receive one in Ireland. If he's acquitted, well, then presumably he'd be rearrested, and the extradition proceedings would start much sooner, but they certainly aren't going to start until the end of his trial at the very earliest.
Though we did hear his sister saying in your report that there was grave doubts as to whether he'd get a fair trial here, so is that likely to get in the way?
Well, it could. I think it depends very much on the circumstances of the time. If you remember, Father Patrick Ryan's extradition was refused on those grounds, but what I would have thought was it would be very possible for the British authorities to use the Criminal Law Jurisdiction Act, escaping from lawful custody, very appropriate in this case. They could take the proceedings in Dublin if the Irish authorities say they would be unhappy about an extradition, so perhaps matters could be handled that way.
Dennis Murray, thank you.
Police in Northern Ireland say the man murdered in County Down earlier today was William Killen, a 36-year-old Protestant. He was shot dead in the fishing village of Portavogie. Police are still trying to establish a motive. The killers broke through the front door of the man's ground floor flat and shot him several times. They'd hijacked a taxi and kept the driver in the boot. He was released unharmed after the attack.
The skipper of a French trawler has appeared in a court in Guernsey facing charges arising from the dispute over fishing rights around the Channel Islands. The trawler, La Calypso, was involved in an incident last Sunday when officers from HMS Brocklesby boarded her, then were taken to Cherbourg. Meanwhile, French and British fishermen met in Cherbourg to urge their governments to settle the argument.
This afternoon, the dispute moved from the seas to the courts. Michel Ménage, the skipper of the Calypso held since Friday, arrived to face two charges: fishing illegally in British waters and failing to comply with an order from a fisheries protection officer. 14 witnesses will be called, 11 from the Navy. As they started to give evidence, navigational charts were brought in. Each of the officers were asked to pinpoint exactly where Calypso had been sailing. Officers from HMS Brocklesby told the court the Calypso was spotted fishing west of Guernsey. The bearings taken showed it was inside British limits. The boat was boarded and ordered to St. Peter Port. Instead, Monsieur Ménage sailed to Cherbourg, ignoring repeated requests to turn back. As the case was adjourned, the Calypso itself remained lashed up in the harbour, impounded. It has all enraged fishermen in Cherbourg, and into that, overnight, sailed the first Guernsey trawlers for over a week. 12 slipped into the harbour, one by one, their cargo of shellfish unloaded without incident. The Easter market is a vital one for Guernsey fishermen. More trawlers will now follow. Then, as some left for home, they were suddenly called back. French fishermen wanted to thrash out the problems face to face. And after much talking, a joint declaration.
Undersigned fishermen's organisations urge the French and the British governments to urgently sort out the problem in accordance with the wishes of the fishermen. All fishermen further wish to work together to maintain the dialogue shown today.
But there's been talk of peace many times before in this dispute. In Guernsey, they know it hasn't happened so far. If the skipper of the Calypso is found guilty here, he could be fined up to £51,000. Fishermen in Normandy have already said they'll club together to pay any penalty. They've also made it plain that if Monsieur Ménage is harshly treated, then they will respond.
The government has issued health authorities with new guidelines on AIDS. They say any member of staff who thinks they're at risk should seek advice and be tested. And the guidelines say that if tests prove positive, staff should avoid invasive procedures, their confidentiality should be respected and alternative work found for them, and that any patient who may have been put at risk should be contacted and offered tests.
Anxiety about possible HIV transmission from healthcare workers to patients was spurred by a handful of recent cases in which hospital staff died of AIDS or were found to be HIV positive. Thousands of ex-patients had to be contacted, counselled and offered HIV tests. The new guidelines say health authorities must tell patients if they've been at risk and must ensure that workers who are HIV positive don't take part in many surgical procedures and some dental and obstetric treatment.
I think our primary objective has been to reassure the public all along and to make sure that in revising these guidelines, and we will continue to revise them as evidence becomes available, that in revising these guidelines we have done everything to reassure the public.
The government's rejected compulsory testing of healthcare workers as impractical and ineffective, and health workers are more at risk from patients than vice versa. 148 have been infected worldwide. The late Kimberly Bagalis is the usually cited example of transmission to patients. Along with 4 others, she's said to have been infected by a Florida dentist, but that's never been proved. The new guidelines give those who may be HIV positive some incentive to come forward voluntarily, because now they should be offered other work and guaranteed confidentiality.
They'll feel safe, that their names won't be all over the newspapers, that they'll be able to work elsewhere. They don't have to stop working. They'll be able to work in a different area of healthcare.
There's no evidence that any healthcare worker in this country has passed on the HIV virus to a patient. The Department of Health believes that these new guidelines will reduce the extremely low risk of such transmission to an absolute minimum.
Later in this news, can the Clinton plan save Boris Yeltsin's political skin? The summit's critics say American aid to Russia is a drop in the ocean. And major for Manchester, the Prime Minister backs the bid for the Olympics. Now the time is 16 minutes past 6.
Tonight's headlines: the Jockey Club is to launch a full-scale inquiry into what went wrong at the Grand National. Thousands of punters have been claiming their money back. United Nations officials in Bosnia are preparing a mass evacuation of refugees from the besieged Muslim town of Srebrenica. And within the hour, one of Britain's most wanted IRA suspects, Nessun Quinlivan, is to appear before a special criminal court in Dublin. The British government is pressing for his extradition. After the weekend summit in Vancouver, the world's richest nations are preparing to consider a massive package of aid for Russia. President Clinton has already pledged £1 billion to President Yeltsin, with a promise of further help to come. Mr. Clinton said their meeting had established a new democratic partnership after 45 years of deadly confrontation. The bulk of the American aid package will provide food and medical supplies. In addition, there'll be cash to encourage joint projects between America and Russian companies. Money will also be available to convert state-owned industry to private enterprises. And there'll be help to dismantle Russia's nuclear arsenal. From Vancouver, Ben Brown.
For once, this was a summit dominated not by nuclear weapons, but by economic aid. And Bill Clinton's giving Boris Yeltsin more than had been expected, $1.6 billion worth.
Mr. President, our nation will not stand on the sidelines when it comes to democracy in Russia. We actively support reform and reformers and you in Russia.
Boris Yeltsin said that America was not giving Christmas presents. The money would be well spent, because his view is that if he goes down, Russian democracy will go down with him.
Today there is no alternative to Yeltsin. Tomorrow maybe, but today there is none.
But his challenge now is to convince the Russian people of that when they vote in this month's referendum on who they want to rule them. If I'm defeated, said Mr. Yeltsin, it would be a major blow for Russia, for the world, for democracy. It would mean a return to the yoke of communism. Both men know the stakes are high, and Mr. Clinton's now calling on the G7 industrialized nations to come up with more cash for Russia. Last year, G7 money was offered but not delivered. This time, says Mr. Clinton, that has to change.
We are going to try to make sure that anything we say will be done, in fact, will be done, and that will be a big difference.
Boris Yeltsin left this summit unashamedly delighted with what he got here, though in the end, America's unequivocal political support may prove to be more important than the money. Bill Clinton headed for home, having shown decisiveness in his first major foreign policy test, but knowing that he now has to persuade the American people that this huge financial outlay will really be worth it. Both presidents have difficult days ahead, and both realise that despite everything that's been said and done at this summit, what will really count is the verdict of the Russian people in the referendum 3 weeks from now. Ben Brown, BBC News, Vancouver.
The chief executive of Mirror Group newspapers, David Montgomery, has dismissed the row over the Daily Mirror's support for the Labour Party. He said it was a dead issue. On the day the company announced losses of more than £80 million, Mr Montgomery also said that journalists who'd left the Mirror had done so because they didn't want to get involved in a new energetic culture at the paper.
Mirror executives lined up today to present another dose of bad news about the group, which has been plagued by controversy ever since the death of Robert Maxwell. The former Murdoch Group editor, David Montgomery, who's now chief executive of the Mirror, said the cost of reorganisation had wiped out a profit on everyday trading last year. But he's optimistic about the Mirror Group's future, despite the departure of one director and of several key journalists, unhappy about treatment of the unions and doubts over the Mirror's continued support for the Labour Party.
The paper's support for the left of centre and its tradition of backing the Labour Party is undiminished. Our detractors, usually in competing organisations, would like the world to think that this might be the case. But that tradition is defended very aggressively by the management and all the editors, all of whom have got the right credentials to support that tradition.
The former industrial editor of the Mirror thinks a move to the right is bad business.
Any further move to the right by the Mirror would be a mistake. He'd lose more circulation and he'd lose credibility. He has to stay with the Daily Mirror as it used to be, whether he likes it or not.
There have been protests about the Montgomery regime, and Labour is unhappy about losing Mirror support.
There are very few newspapers that give the Labour Party any fair coverage at all. And for the Mirror to desert the Labour Party too would be dreadful.
With Labour lobbying Mirror shareholders, the pressure on Mr Montgomery is unlikely to let up.
3 of Britain's top policemen have told the BBC that some police officers used to break the rules to secure convictions. Interviewed for tonight's Panorama, they say it's now up to the police to prove to the public they're gathering evidence honestly, even if that means some guilty people go free. This report from Steve Bradshaw.
A series of high-profile miscarriages of justice over recent years has led to doubts over how the police obtained and presented evidence. Those doubts centred around confessions. Now Britain's top policemen are making confessions of their own about how fellow officers used to bend or even break the rules.
I think there was a time when a minority of officers were prepared to bend the rules. I think they were prepared to massage the evidence, not for personal gain, or not even in their own terms to tell lies about people. But I think elaborating on things that were said in a way to make sure that the case had the strongest chance of going through to a conviction. That was wrong. I don't justify it.
The police claim the abuses were effectively ended by new laws on evidence introduced in the 80s. Last month, they introduced strict new guidelines on interviews, advising officers not to put undue pressure on suspects. But West Yorkshire's Chief Constable has very different memories.
All detectives in those days were big guys. I would walk into a room, and just the fact that I'd perhaps take my coat off, the criminal would perceive that that act was going to be followed up by a thumping or a fist or something, and therefore that put that person ill at ease and certainly more likely to tell me what they wish to tell me.
The chief constables are now speaking openly in an effort to convince the public police have cleaned up their act. But they admit that in the short term at least, their efforts to win back public confidence will almost certainly lead to fewer convictions.
And Steve Bradshaw's full report is on Panorama at 9:30 tonight on BBC One.
New laws to force absent parents to pay maintenance for their children came into effect today. A child support agency will trace absent parents, mostly fathers, to assess how much they should pay and take them to court if they don't. The government hopes to save more than £500 million this year alone. But critics say that families on benefits could lose out.
2 million children live in one-parent families, double the number 10 years ago, and yet only a third of lone parents receive maintenance. Lynn Davies has got no financial support from her ex-husband since their divorce 5 years ago, and relies on income support to bring up her daughter Jenny. Now the Child Support Agency will be able to track down her ex-husband and make him pay.
I see it as a moral issue. I don't think that absent parents should be able to just walk away from their children and not pay a penny towards their upkeep.
Single-parent organisations welcome the principle that absent fathers should pay, but because maintenance will replace benefits pound for pound, some parents on income support could be worse off.
Some women and some men will be floated off income support, so they'll lose things like free school meals for their children and free prescriptions and other health benefits, and that will mean that some of the poorest people already living at the margins will be pushed further down.
Some parents on benefits like Laura Johnson from North London are refusing to cooperate with the new agency as they don't want maintenance or any contact with their ex-partners. They face having a fifth of their income support deducted as a penalty.
All the money I would get would be deducted from my benefits, and also he would want to be involved in my life and my son's life if he were paying us money, because he wouldn't pay for something that he can't see.
The Child Support Agency says mothers fearing violence won't have to name ex-partners, but it accepts there's no immediate financial incentive for many women on benefits to cooperate.
If maintenance is established now, over time when their circumstances change, for example when they go back to work, this will be a very tangible benefit of portable income.
Through its computer network, the Child Support Agency will be able to trace most absent fathers, and this should lead to a dramatic increase in the numbers paying maintenance. Settlements will be higher too, averaging £50 a week, twice that of existing court awards. Eventually, the agency hopes that, like death and taxes, child maintenance will be seen as unavoidable and the inevitable consequence of parenthood.
On Thursday, March the 4th, when we reported the death of Tony Bland, we referred to a former Roman Catholic priest, and that may have been understood to refer to the Reverend James Morrow. We should like to make it clear that the Reverend Morrow is a priest of the Roman Catholic Church in good standing with the church authorities.
The Prime Minister has dismissed suggestions that the chaos at the Grand National will affect Britain's Olympic bid. Mr Major's comments came during a visit to Switzerland to press Manchester's case at the International Olympic Committee. During the meeting, the IOC President, Juan Antonio Samaran, said he thought Britain deserved to host the Games in the year 2000. From Lausanne, Rob Bonnet reports.
It's no longer called a photo opportunity, but a grip and grin, meeting for the third time the Prime Minister and Juan Antonio Samaran with an agenda that, out of diplomatic courtesy, did not overstate Manchester's case, but certainly reiterated the government's total commitment to it. However, the timing might have been better. The Grand National fiasco has hardly enhanced Britain's sporting image, but has it damaged Manchester's bid?
I don't believe it's made the slightest bit of difference. Someone made a mistake. It went wrong. These things happen from time to time. That has to be set against a British sporting reputation that's been built up over generations.
Later, the two men visited the site of the IOC's museum to be opened this summer, where there were further words of encouragement. You wished Manchester luck in their bid. You said they deserved the Games. Is that a hint that they might get them?
I said that Great Britain deserved the Games, no? Because I said before, you invented the modern sport. You really invented this sport.
The President, naturally, is kind to all bidding cities. Nevertheless, Manchester's star seems to be rising and others may be falling. Favourite Sydney, for instance, despite their technical strengths and undeniable glamour, are suffering from the informally declared intention of South Africa to bid for the Games in the year 2004. That would be politically irresistible to the IOC and might preempt Sydney, since two successive Olympics in the Southern Hemisphere are well nigh impossible. However, there's still no commitment from the Prime Minister to personally lead Manchester's bid into the vote this coming September. His staff plead a crowded diary, which still has to be sorted out. Many IOC insiders believe that his presence is crucial. Without him, they say, it could simply look like an admission of defeat. Rob Bonnet, BBC News, Lausanne.
And that was the 6 o'clock news on Monday, April the 5th. More news at 9, but from Moira and me, good evening.
mellow, it was a wet and windy day. Over an inch of rain in many places such as Ballypatrick Forest and in Carden Hall in Cornwall, and the figures are still coming in. And the winds are still picking up over England and Wales, touching gale force at times this evening and tonight. The reason, you can see that